Hey everyone. Today we are going to dig into chapter 14, which is all about motivation. And so we're going to talk about some different things that motivate us and some theories that go behind them. I've got your quiz here with me so I can reference some things and drop a few quiz hints like I have been. So if you see me referencing that, I have it with me, so don't forget to do that. But anyways, I wanted to start off by bringing to your attention this exploring managerial careers section that's the very beginning of your chapter. And it talks about Bridget and how she loved her job, really liked her job, kind of, as far as pay and all of that, it's what she wanted to do. But all of a sudden she was dreading going to work and she couldn't really figure out why. So I'm not going to read it to you because that would bore you, but I just wanted to bring to your attention because it is a really great example of showing you intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation and the differences between the two. Intrinsic motivation is more of what motivates you internally, like achieving things and it could be different things, working your way up the ladder or whatever that may look like to you. Extrinsic motivation is more how much money you're going to pay me to do it, and rewards, praises, things like that. So I just thought this was actually a really good example and wanted to bring it to your attention. So y'all make sure to check it out. Okay, so once again, this chapter is all about motivation, and motivation really has two major components, if you will, direction and intensity. And if you look with me in this part, the very first part of your chapter in 14:1, it kind of breaks it down between the two. So the direction is really just what the person is trying to achieve, and the intensity is the effort that person puts in to actually get there. So and so that's kind of how this chapter starts, and the motivation being that force within us or outside of the body. So depending, like I said, intrinsic versus extrinsic, that really energizes us and directs us, and to help us sustain human behavior. And we all have different things that motivates us. So I think that's like the interesting, cool part. What motivates me to do a great job at work might be completely different than what motivates you, and vice versa. Or it could just be what motivates you to get out of bed every morning, what motivates you to, go for a run, or, whatever that looks like. Okay. So, that's kind of how the chapter starts, and it gives you some, main keywords here. Just make sure that you check them out. I know for sure here, when it talks about ability, just referring to the knowledge and skills and receptiveness to actually learning that a person brings to a task or job. I do know that you should revisit that on your quiz. Also be aware of different role perceptions. So how one actually understands their organizational role or their role in the organization. So just be mindful of that. So if in your book it talks about how, and it's in the very end of this section, I believe, it talks about that motivation theories are classified as either content theories or process theories, right? Content motivation theories really focus on the content of what actually motivates people. And then process motivation theories really address how people become motivated. So how people perceive and think about an actual situation, okay? So in your book, it talks about different content theories. So if you look in section 14:2, it mentions that the McClellan Learns Needs theory is a content theory. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which some of y'all might be aware of, is a content theory. Herzberg's motivation hygiene factor is a content theory. And there's a couple more they mentioned, and then the process theories are your operant conditioning, which we'll get to, your equity, your goal setting, your expectancy. So those types of theories, all right? So we'll kind of get into those, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on each one because I'm trying to keep these a little bit on the shorter end. I've made some of them a little bit longer than what I anticipated. But you do need to be aware of a need, what a need is, all right? So that human condition that becomes energized when people feel deficient in some respects. So think of when you're hungry, you're like, oh, I need something to eat, okay? So think of it that way, all right? And your book actually gives you an example of that. It also talks about a manifest need. So whatever need is motivating us at a given time. So manifest needs really dominate our other things. So what is motivating us at that particular time? That's maybe what we might need. And it could be that, you know, you're hungry and you walk by a pizza place and you smell pizza and, you know, it motivates you like, I'm hungry and I want pizza right now. And if you had not done that, you know, you could have been fine with tacos or something else. That's a very bottom of the totem pole example, but just kind of an example of how the difference between the two. All right, so let's go ahead and dig into the manifest needs theory here. So in the manifest needs theory, it talks about how Henry A. Murray kind of broke it down into primary needs and secondary needs. So primary needs being your physiological needs, like so your food, water, sex, urination, so forth. Okay, your secondary needs are more learned throughout your life. All right, and that could be your need for love, your need for achievement, your need for affiliation, anything like that. So if you look here, I just thought this is a good example and I wanted to bring it up. Table 14.1, it gives you some sample items from Murray's list of actual needs. Okay, so here's some things that he has mentioned that are needs. And if you look at them, a lot of them probably are pretty accurate or irrelevant to a lot of people. And it kind of goes in to actually explain and give you examples of each one. There's the Learn's needs theory, sorry. Is it backwards today? And so this is David McClelland's, and as I mentioned, I think I even called it McClelland's learned needs theory earlier. But it is built on the work that Murray did, so the previous. And Murray studied like many different needs, and your book mentions. And so McClelland breaks it down into a little bit more in depth in the three needs: the need for achievement, the need for affiliation, and the need for power. Okay. And so McClelland actually believed that these needs are learned primarily in childhood. And if you really think about it, a lot they are, or we could probably relate to that anyways. But he also believed that these needs could be taught. Okay, so he breaks each one of these down. So need for achievement, need for affiliation, and need for power. And I'm kind of going through it a little bit quickly and showing you where they are in your textbook, just for the sake of time. Okay. So then we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a pretty popular one. You'll see it in different textbooks. I know we talk about an Intro to Business and in management and a couple other classes as well. But Maslow went on to say that there were 5 basic types of human needs here. And, you know, earlier researchers had, you know, talked about lots of different needs, but Maslow really broke it down into 5, and they list the 5 here. The physiological and survival needs, so our most basic human needs, the safety and security needs, our social needs, our ego and esteem. Sometimes you see this in different textbooks. This one calls it ego and esteem. Sometimes other books call it self-confidence, you know, all kind of the same thing. And then the last need being self-actualization. And it mentions in your book here that this one's the most difficult to describe because a lot of times we never really are completely satisfied with ourselves. So, I think a lot of us will find that once we hit that milestone or goal we're achieving, then we're always after something else. So it really does vary a lot, varies greatly, and satisfying that self-actualization need means really being able to develop all of our special abilities to their fullest degrees. And so it is one of the harder ones to achieve here. But if you look here in 14.6, it gives you you'll see the pyramid is a very well-known visual of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so it just kind of gives you a good visual there of the physiological and the survival being at the bottom, because he sees that as the most important. He also kind of structures it as if you don't have this bottom. So if you don't have the physiological and survival, you're not going to have the safety and security. So it's kind of showing you need the bottom to have the second one. You need safety and security to have social, etc., so forth and so on. So that's kind of how the pyramid is laid out. All right. So then we have Aldarfer's ERG theory here. And this is one that you probably haven't heard much of, if you at all. So it really compresses Maslow's 5 need categories to 3. And existence, relatedness, and growth. So in addition, it really details the dynamics of individuals' movement between the need categories in somewhat of a more detailed way. Okay, so here's another visual here. Your growth needs, so that includes your internal self-esteem and your self-actualization, your relatedness needs, and then your existed needs. So it's similar but different. And so just make sure that you check that out. So then we have the Herzberg's motivator hygiene theory. Okay. And so this theory is, once again, a little bit even more further refinement, if you will, of Maslow's theory. So Herzberg argued that there are 2 sets of needs. So instead of the 5 that Maslow came up with, he came up with 2. And then there are 2 different motivators, if you will. So he talked about motivators, your growth needs, and then your hygienes that relate more to your work environment. Okay, so more of your basic human needs to avoid pain, if you will. Okay, so hygiene. So your according to Herzberg, if you will, growth needs really motivate us to perform well. And when these needs are met, they lead to experiences of satisfaction. And then your hygiene needs, on the other hand, must really be met to avoid dissatisfaction, but not necessarily provide satisfaction or motivation. So you need to be aware of these for your quiz. You're going to see several of these different theories peppered in as far as just needing to know, being aware of what most of them are for your quiz. All right, so those are kind of wrapping up the content theories of motivation. So we're going to move on to the process theories of motivation. So here, first, your book talks about the operant conditioning theory, and it really focuses on the learning of voluntary behaviors. So it indicates that learning results from our operating on the environment. So after we operate on the environment, as your book says, different consequences result. So they determine the likelihood of similar behavior in the future. So learning occurs because we do something to the environment. So then the environment reacts to our action, and then subsequent behavior is influenced by this reaction. So it shows in here that, the operant conditioning theory is that we really learn to behave in a particular fashion because of consequences that result from our past. So an example, let's say that you're at school and the teacher tells you to stop talking, and you do not listen, and you continue to keep talking and interrupting, and so then she sends you to the principal. Okay, and the principal gives you, detention or whatever that looks like. Okay, you could be like, man, detention really sucks or stinks. I don't want to do that, or that was embarrassing. I don't want that to happen anymore. That was embarrassing. Whatever it looks like. And so then you learn maybe not to continue to disrupt your teacher anymore, or whatever that looks like. But it's a good example. So if you scroll down here to the example they provide you here, it gives you a table here talking about process theories of motivation. So check that out. under the operant model, if you will, it also talks about reinforcement and extinction. So make sure that you're aware of those, all right? So reinforcement really occurs when consequences make it more likely that the response or behavior will be repeated in the future. So it gives you an example here of, calling superior is a reinforcer. So praise. So like if you get rewarded or praised from your boss for doing something in particular, there's a good chance that you'll do that same thing again, knowing that it's good. Extinction occurs when the consequence makes it less likely for that to happen. So if you do something at work and your boss like, please don't do it again, that you did not do that right, there's a good chance that you won't do that anymore, okay? So that's the difference between the reinforcement and the extinction. All right, I'm going to move on down. And it does talk about different schedules of reinforcement here. And just to bring that to your attention real quick, it's just the frequency at which effective employee behavior should be reinforced. And so it goes through the different types, the fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, and variable interval. So just brief over those and just make sure you're aware of each of those. All right, we're going to move on to the equity theory. All right. So this one states that motivation is affected by the outcomes that we receive for our inputs compared to the outcomes and inputs of other people. Okay. So we are motivated by the outcomes we receive for our inputs compared to somebody else for the same, okay? So it is really concerned with the reactions that people have to outcomes they receive as part of a social exchange, if you will, is what verbiage your book uses. So according to this theory, that our reactions to the outcomes we receive from others, such as your employer, your boss, it could even be your colleagues, depend both on how we value those outcomes in an absolute sense and on the circumstances surrounding that. So it also suggests that our reactions will be influenced by our perceptions and our inputs, okay? So provided in order to receive these actual outcomes. So in your thoughts, so just to sum that all up, are you getting what you feel like you should be? It could be that you're working really hard. Are you getting paid? Do you feel like you're getting paid for the work that you're actually doing? So that's kind of what that means when it says, did I get as much out as I put into this, right? And then you kind of compare it. Did I get as much for my inputs as my coworkers got for theirs? So that's the equity theory. And then it goes to break it down into the basic model, and it just talks about your inputs versus your outcomes. So the inputs, any factors that we contribute, right, to an organization that we feel have value, and then the outcomes is anything we perceive as getting back from an organization in exchange for our inputs. So your inputs versus your outcomes there. And so that's kind of what all the equity theory is about. So just make sure you're mindful of that one. And I'm going to scroll on down to the goal theory. Okay. And you do need to make sure that you are aware of this one for your exam as well. But the goal theory states that people will perform better if they have, difficult or specific accepted performance goals or objectives. I know that, just for example, even just every day I make a to-do list. Well, if you're one that makes a to-do list, that is actually your goals of things to get done for the day, right? So you might not know it, but you're setting goals just by making a to-do list. So I know this, this is in my opinion, but it's a very basic theory that I feel like could be relevant for a lot of people. But that's the basis for the goal setting theory. The second basic premise is that difficult goals result in better performance than easy goals. And once again, it doesn't mean that difficult goals are always achieved, but it's saying that our performance will be better when we intend to actually achieve harder goals. So you can agree or not, but just as kind of something to throw out there. But it has a lot of good information here that's very relevant, and it talks about how goal commitment here and the degree to which we dedicate ourselves to actually achieving a goal. And I think a lot of that has to do with how hard your goal is too. But just make sure that you're really aware of what the goal theory is. because you will revisit that on your quiz. Okay, I'm going to skip on down. The expectancy theory, okay? This really talks about how and you will revisit this on your quiz too. Sorry, I kind of jumped ahead of myself, and I hadn't fully been paying attention, and I wanted to make sure I dropped some quiz hints. So you will need to be aware of this for your quiz. So it talks about how we will exert much effort to perform at high levels so that we can obtain value outcomes. All right. So it mentions that it is the motivation theory that many organizational behavior researchers find most intriguing. And it really ties together many of concepts and hypotheses from theories discussed earlier in the chapter. So, the expectancy theory is really general, but it's very useful, and it's used very widely throughout. And so it talks about how when we're faced with two or more alternatives, which will we select? And, once an alternative is chosen, how motivated will we be to actually pursue that choice? Okay. So it focuses on the two major aspects of motivation: your direction, which we talked about earlier. So which alternative, and the intensity, how much effort to implement the alternative. So, and once again, it talks about the attractiveness of an alternative, and is it determined by our expectations? Okay, so what's likely to happen if we choose it? And so it states that when faced with two or more alternatives, we will select the most attractive one, something we can usually relate to. And the greater the attractiveness of the chosen alternative, the more motivated we will be to actually pursue it. So it's kind of the basis of the expectancy theory. And just make sure that you check it out. Like I said, I'm trying to make these a little shorter, and it doesn't look like I'm really succeeding in this one, but just making sure I didn't miss anything on there that I wanted to cover. The last thing that I was going to talk about in this chapter it talks about the different recent research on these motivation theories, and it's really just some different things that they bring up for each of these theories. As far as it talks about in the operant conditioning theory, it is there has not really been much research using operant conditioning theory in designing reward systems, even though there's obvious applications. And so just a few things, and I won't read you. These are just kind of updates and more of what we'll call modern today, if you will, of the theories and how they are applied. This catching the entrepreneurial spirit is really good as far as entrepreneurs and motivation. And it really, you can reflect back to our entrepreneurship chapter, chapter 7, I believe. That it kind of ties it in, and you'll appreciate it now that we've kind of covered that and you have kind of a basis. Anyways, see if I can land on one more thing. A couple of things that I didn't necessarily cover just because we're running out of time. There's a lot of theories in this book. You just make sure that you are aware of all the theories and some of those key terms that actually go with them. So if you look in your book, your key terms, some of these I mentioned, ERG theory, extrinsic motivation, some of these will be on your quiz. So make sure motivators, need for affiliation, negative reinforcement, you'll see that. So just make sure that you're kind of aware, skim through. This is something good to look at that you can kind of at least just skim through so you have at least seen it. Anyways, that's all I have for today. I talked way longer than I anticipated, and I think I rambled a little bit, but it is almost Friday, and that's where my brain is overloaded. Anyways, y'all have a fantastic week, and I will be chatting with you soon.